Welcome to the Deep Dive. We're the place where we dig into complex ideas, often buried in academic sources or dense analysis, and try to pull out the core insights for you.
And today, we're diving deep into something that really asks you to put aside maybe your usual way of thinking about politics.
Yeah, definitely. We're stripping away the layers of, good versus evil leaders or historical destiny or unique national character. We're looking at the cold, hard, universal rules that seem to govern who gets power and who keeps it.
That's right. The core idea from the sources we're looking at is pretty radical. Politics is basically the same game everywhere. It doesn't matter if it's a giant country, a small town, a big corporation, or even an organized crime family.
The underlying logic is always the same. And the main goal, the number one priority for any successful leader, is not necessarily making life better for everyone.
Nope. It's political survival, staying in power, career longevity. If you want to understand why leaders do what they do, the sources say, don't listen too much to their speeches. Look at the structure they operate in. What do they have to do to keep their job?
Exactly. So we're moving past the simple labels, democracy, dictatorship, whatever. We need to look at the underlying mechanics. And the framework we're using today simplifies this down to three key groups of people. Their size and relationship pretty much determine everything.
Right. Three dimensions of political life. Let's break them down.
Okay, first up, the biggest group. This is the pool of potential supporters, what the sources call the nominal selectorate, or the interchangeables.
Yeah, the nominal selectorate is basically everyone who, legally speaking, has some say in choosing the leader. So like in the US, that's all eligible voters.
Even if they don't actually vote.
Even if they don't vote, they could. In the old Soviet Union, technically, it was all adult citizens. They were supposed to vote, even if the choice was, well, limited. We call them interchangeables because individually, they don't have much clout. Lose one voter, gain another. They're easily swapped out.
Okay, so that's who can choose. What about dimension two? The people who actually choose, the real selectorate or the influentials.
Right. The real selectorate is the group whose choices really matter in picking the leader. Now, in a place like the US or the UK, with wide suffrage, the real selectorate is pretty close in size to the nominal selectorate. Most eligible voters are also the influential ones, collectively.
But in other systems?
Totally different. Think back to the USSR again. Huge nominal selectorate, millions of citizens. But the real selectorate, the influentials who actually picked the general secretary, that was maybe just the few thousand high-ranking Communist Party members. A tiny fraction.
Wow, okay. That difference alone tells you a lot about who a leader needs to worry about. A US president needs tens of millions. A Soviet leader needed a few thousand loyalists. Which brings us to the third, and maybe the most critical group, the winning coalition, the essentials.
This is the absolute core group. The winning coalition is the minimum number of people whose support is essential to keep the leader in power right now. If this group decides to switch allegiance, the leader is gone, done, finished.
And the size of this group is the real key.
It's the absolute linchpin, according to this theory. The size of the winning coalition shapes almost everything. How the government spends money, whether it focuses on public projects or private payoffs, how oppressive it is, even how long the leader is likely to last.
And the range in size can be huge, can't it?
Astronomical. You could have a winning coalition of maybe just a couple of hundred people in a really tight autocracy like, say, North Korea. Key military figures, family members, top security officials. Their loyalty is literally essential for survival.
Compared
to, say, a prime minister in the UK. To maintain power, they need a working majority in parliament, which ultimately relies on winning enough votes. So their winning coalition is effectively a significant chunk of the electorate, maybe 25, 30%, millions of people.
Okay, so that's the fundamental difference. It's not about the type of government label, but the size of that essential group.
Precisely. Governments differ along these dimensions, not in fundamental kind. A so-called dictatorship or autocracy is simply a system with a very small number of essentials, drawn from a usually much larger pool of interchangeables and influentials.
Which means those few essentials are incredibly powerful and expect big rewards.
You got it. And a democracy, structurally, is the opposite. It has a large winning coalition drawn from large, real and nominal selectorates.
And because that coalition is so big,
You can't afford to just buy them off individually with private cash. It's too expensive, too complex. So leaders in these systems have to rely more on providing broad public goods, good policies, effective services, things that benefit large numbers of people to keep that big coalition happy.
that's a really different way to look at it. It kind of takes the morality out and just looks at the mechanics.
That's the idea. Judge the system by its structure, not just the leader's personality.
And what's fascinating is how this small coalition dynamic can pop up in unexpected places. Like not just in faraway dictatorships, but right inside a modern republic. Let's talk about Bell, California.
Oh, Bell is the perfect, almost textbook example of a tiny kleptocracy operating with democratic rules. It's a small working-class city, mostly Hispanic, not wealthy at all.
Yet the leaders were paying themselves fortunes, right? Robert Rizzo, the city manager.
Rizzo had a compensation package heading towards, what, $800,000 a year? And an estimated pension deal worth maybe $650,000 annually. And the city council members, 4 out of 5 of them, were pulling down close to $100,000 a year.
$100,000 for a part-time city council job in a poor town? How is that even possible?
Yep.
Most council jobs pay like a few $1,000s a year, if that.
Exactly. The average in similar California cities was under $5,000. They did it through a loophole, paying themselves not just for the council seat, but huge stipends, like $8,000 a month each, just for sitting on obscure city agency boards. Classic private rewards funneled through the system.
Okay, but they were elected officials. How'd they get away with it? Didn't voters notice?
That's where the small coalition comes in. Bell had around 9,400 registered voters, which isn't huge to begin with, but the key municipal elections. Turnout was abysmal. Sometimes only a few hundred people voted. For years, the council seats often went uncontested.
Ah, so they didn't need broad support at all.
Not even close. They only needed the loyalty of a tiny fraction of residents, maybe a few dozen people, perhaps family, friends, people who got city contracts or jobs. Their winning coalition was minuscule. Keeping them happy was easy and affordable, relatively speaking.
And the cost was pushed on to everyone else.
Absolutely. You saw it in the taxes. Bell's property tax rate was about 1.55%. Nearby affluent places like Beverly Hills, around 1.10%. The high taxes in poor Bell paid for the lavish salaries and perks of the leadership and their tiny coalition.
It's a perfect illustration of the rules. Rule 1, keep the winning coalition small.
Check.
Rule 3, control the money flow.
Double check. Through taxes and obscure agency budgets.
And the underlying principle. Survival depends on pleasing the few, not the many, which allows for this kind of, well, looting.
Exactly. It's pure kleptocracy, just hidden behind the facade of elections.
It's not just modern local politics either. This same logic applies even to historical figures we think of as absolute rulers, like Louis XIV, the Sun King.
Right, l'état c'est moi, I am the state. But the sources argue that's just rhetoric. No one rules alone, ever. The term monarchy means rule by one, but it's never actually true. Louis XIV was a master strategist, not because he ruled alone, but because he brilliantly managed his winning coalition.
He basically applied Rule 1, keep the coalition small and loyal.
He did, but by changing who was in it. When he took full power in 1661, the old aristocracy, the noblesse d'épée, or nobility of the sword, had become too powerful, too independent during the preceding regency. They were his inherited coalition, but they were expensive and potentially disloyal.
So he needed to sideline them.
Precisely. He couldn't just eliminate them, but he could make them less essential. He did this by building up a new group of loyalists. The noblesse de robe, the nobility of the gown. These were lawyers, administrators, officials who owed their titles, their positions, their income entirely to him.
Ah, creating a new set of essentials dependent on his favor.
Exactly. He also centralized the army, making officers more dependent on royal appointment rather than their old feudal ties. He effectively swapped out an old, unreliable coalition for a new, smaller, more loyal one that he controlled directly through patronage and salaries. He understood instinctively how to secure his power base.
He knew the rules, even if they weren't written down then. Maybe we should lay out those 5 core rules explicitly now. They're kind of the blueprint for political survival, according to this theory.
Yeah, these are the 5 rules to rule by. They apply whether you're a king, a CEO, a dictator, or even trying to manage a tricky committee.
Okay, rule 1, we've hit this hard. Keep the winning coalition as small as possible. Why is that always number 1?
Simplicity and cost. Fewer people means you can give each one a bigger slice of the pie. Private rewards are more concentrated, more impactful. It's cheaper and easier to maintain loyalty when you only need a few key backers.
Rule 2. Keep the nominal selectorate as large as possible. That seems counterintuitive. Why want a huge pool of potential voters if you only care about a few?
Leverage. If there's a vast ocean of interchangeables out there, your current essentials know they're replaceable. If one steps out of line, you can easily pluck someone else from the crowd to take their place and enjoy the perks. It keeps the current essentials insecure and, therefore, cheaper to keep loyal.
Okay, that makes sense. Rule 3. Control the money flow.
Absolutely non-negotiable. You can't hand out rewards, whether it's cash, contracts, tax breaks, or even public goods, if you don't control the source of the funds, taxes, oil revenue, foreign aid, whatever it is. Control the treasury, control the coalition.
Rule 4. Pay your essentials just enough to keep them loyal, but not a penny more.
Oof, yeah. This is the cold, hard calculation. Every dollar you give, an essential beyond the absolute minimum needed to stop them defecting, is a dollar wasted. It's money you could have kept for yourself or used to shore up support elsewhere. You need their loyalty, but you want it at the lowest possible price.
And the final one, Rule 5, which really impacts the public. Don't waste resources on the people's welfare, public goods.
Basically, yeah. Focus your spending on the private rewards for your essentials. From the small coalition leader's perspective, spending money on broad public benefits is inefficient. It helps lots of non-essentials who give you no direct political support and might even use their improved well-being, better education, better health to organize against you later. Public goods are a luxury you can't afford if your goal is pure survival based on a small group.
Wow. Those 5 rules paint a pretty bleak picture, but also a brutally logical one for anyone whose main goal is just staying on top.
It's a functional roadmap. Cynical, yes, but functional within that logic.
So let's see these rules in action when it comes to actually getting power in the first place. It seems like timing and offering a better deal are key.
Absolutely. Challengers usually win not just because the old leader is unpopular, but because they manage to convince the incumbent's essential supporters that they'll get a better deal, more money, more power, more security by switching sides. It's often about expected future rewards.
Khomeini's return to Iran in '79 seems like a masterclass in timing and positioning.
It really was. Ayatollah Khomeini was a major opponent of the Shah, of course. But crucially, during the height of the protests, he stayed in exile first Iraq, then France. He refused to come back until the Shah had physically left the country.
Why was that so important?
Because it meant when he finally did land in Tehran, there was no one else. He became the single, undisputed symbol of the revolution for the millions in the streets, the huge nominal selectorate. He brilliantly used the masses to topple the old regime.
But then what happened? Did he embrace that mass support?
Not for a second. In terms of power structure, the moment he had power, he slammed the door shut. Rule 1 immediately kicked in. He made sure real authority was concentrated in the hands of a small group of clerics, the Council of Guardians, all those secular groups, moderate religious figures who helped bring down the Shah. Sidelined. He used the large selectorate for the takeover, then built a tiny, loyal coalition for survival. Classic move.
And sometimes it's not strategic genius, but just circumstance, like with Corazon Aquino in the Philippines.
Right. Her husband, Ninoy Aquino, was a powerful opposition figure, but was assassinated. Cory Aquino, though less of a traditional politician, had the advantage later because she challenged Ferdinand Marcos when everyone knew he was dying of lupus.
So his essentials knew the gravy train was ending.
Exactly. Marcos couldn't guarantee future rewards from his deathbed. His key backers, military, business elites, started looking for a new leader who could promise them continued access and wealth. Aquino became the viable alternative they could rally around to protect their interests. If the leader can't deliver, the essentials will find someone who can.
And if you fail to deliver, the consequences can be dire. Look at Samuel Doe in Liberia.
Yeah, Doe came to power in a violent coup, a master sergeant taking over. He understood Rule 3 instinctively. Control the guns, control the money. He survived multiple coup attempts because he kept his small military coalition paid off, largely with foreign aid money initially.
But when the money dried up?
When the Cold War ended, U.S. aid stopped. Suddenly, he couldn't deliver. When he was eventually captured by a rival faction led by Prince Johnson, the torture ended with that chilling question: where's the money? He couldn't answer. He couldn't pay his essentials anymore. Game over. Brutally.
So you seize power, But that first period is incredibly dangerous, especially for autocrats. They need to consolidate, often through purges.
Purges aren't just paranoia, they're often a structural necessity in these systems. The people who helped you get power are the ones who know exactly how weak you might be, and they might fancy the top job themselves. Saddam Hussein's consolidation in Iraq in '79 is textbook.
He went after his own party members.
Hundreds of them. High-ranking Bahalathists, military officers, intellectuals, many who had supported his rise. He had them rounded up, accused of conspiracy, and executed. It was a brutal but effective way to shrink his winning coalition, Rule 1, down to only the most terrified and loyal, and to make everyone else understand they were replaceable. Rule 4, keep them off balance.
That need to keep essentials loyal but scared seems crucial. Mugabe in Zimbabwe played this game too, didn't he?
Oh, absolutely. After winning independence in 1980, he initially formed a coalition government that included his main rival, Joshua Nkomo's ZAPU party, and even kept some white administrators from the old regime.
Why do that if Rule 1 is paramount?
Because he needed them temporarily. He needed ZAPU's political base for stability, and he needed the white administrators for their technical skills and access to international finance. Rule 3, control the money. He enlarged the coalition briefly to secure his footing and the revenue stream.
But once he felt secure,
the purge began. He ruthlessly sidelined ZAPU, driving Nkomo into exile. He launched the Gukurahundi campaign, using his North Korean-trained 5th Brigade to terrorize Nkomo's supporters in Matabeleland. He arrested or pushed out the whites he no longer needed. He consolidated power back down to his core ZANU-PF loyalists, a much smaller, more controllable group.
it seems like this constant danger would make autocratic rule really unstable compared to democracy. But you said the 10-year data suggests autocrats often last longer.
It's one of the really counterintuitive findings. Yeah, Democratic leaders tend to have shorter tenures, only about 4% last a decade or more. They're constantly battling to keep a huge, diverse coalition happy with good policy, which is incredibly difficult and wears them down politically. Think about approval ratings, midterm losses, etc.
Whereas autocrats
face that intense danger right at the beginning during the consolidation. But if they survive that initial period and successfully lock in their small, loyal, well-paid coalition, they can often hang on for a long time. About 11% make it past 10 years. They don't need good policy. They just need reliable cash flow for the few essentials.
And this isn't just about countries. This same dynamic plays out in the corporate world, right? The Hewlett-Packard example with Carly Fiorina.
Classic corporate politics mirroring state politics. Fiorina came in as CEO facing a powerful, entrenched board, her inherited coalition, many with deep HP roots and big shareholdings. They were skeptical.
So she applied the rules.
Textbook Rule 1. She systematically shrank the board size, first by 20%, then later by almost 30%. She replaced the old guard with new directors who were more aligned with her, who owed their position on the board to her, creating a smaller, more dependent coalition.
It helped her survive the fight over the Compaq merger.
It did. That was a huge battle, and her reshaped board backed her. But the inherent instability of small coalitions remained. She won the battle, but eventually lost the war. The smaller board eventually ousted her.
And the cycle continued even after she left.
Exactly. Within about a year, the main board members who engineered her removal were themselves gone. It just highlights the volatility. When the essential group is small, alliances shift fast, loyalty is conditional, and nobody's position is ever truly secure. You always have to watch your back.
Always watching your back and always needing the resources to pay off the people watching it with you. Which brings us back squarely to the economics of survival and Rule 3. Control the money. How do leaders actually get the money? Taxation seems key.
It is, but how they tax reveals a lot about their coalition size. All leaders face limits. You can't tax so much, people stop working. You need your coalition to accept the burden, and it costs money to collect taxes.
How do democracies handle this differently?
In large coalition systems, leaders generally prefer taxes that are transparent and seen as relatively fair because they need broad public support. High taxes on income or consumption are politically risky if you need millions of votes.
The Mexico example showed this, right? Tax rates falling as competition increased.
Yeah, when the PRI party had a near monopoly on power, a smaller effective coalition, Mexico's top marginal income tax rate was way up at 55%. As the system opened up, became more competitive, and the PRI needed to appeal to a much larger group to win elections, those rates had to come down significantly. High taxes became politically unsustainable.
Okay, so autocrats, needing only a small coalition, prefer different kinds of taxes.
They definitely do. They prefer revenue sources that are easy to collect, don't require a lot of public cooperation or transparency, and ideally don't depend too much on the general population being productive or happy.
Like stealing from the poor to give to the rich, basically.
Often, yeah. The example of Ghana's cocoa tax under some regimes is brutal. Cocoa farmers were the backbone of the export economy, but they were politically unorganized non-essentials. The government slapped huge taxes on them, effectively confiscating much of their earnings.
And use that money
to shower benefits on the urban elites, military figures, bureaucrats. The leader's small winning coalition, it worked for the leader's survival in the short term, but long term, it destroyed the incentive for farmers to grow cocoa. Production collapsed. Classic case of prioritizing private rewards for the essentials, Rule 4, over the long-term public good, violating Rule 5.
And then there's the ultimate easy money.
Yeah.
Natural resources. The so-called resource curse.
Ah, yes. For a small coalition leader, finding oil or diamonds or valuable minerals is like hitting the jackpot. It's the dream scenario.
Why? Because it's easy money.
It's money that flows regardless of what the population does. You can tax oil revenue at 50%, 90%, even close to 100%, and the oil still comes out of the ground. You don't need a skilled, educated, healthy workforce to extract it, usually just foreign companies and your security forces.
So it lets the leader bypass the population entirely.
Completely. Look at Nigeria. Huge oil wealth for decades. Yet between 1970 and 2000, average income per person actually fell. Poverty rates soared. The oil money went straight to the ruling elite and their coalition.
Why wouldn't they use some of that wealth to, develop the country?
Rule 5 again. Why would you? Resource wealth allows the leader to lavishly reward the essentials while intentionally keeping the general population poor, uneducated, and disorganized. A prosperous, educated population is a threat. They might demand political rights, coordinate protests. Resource wealth means you don't need them, so it's safer to keep them down.
That's incredibly cynical. And if resources aren't enough, these leaders often turn to massive borrowing.
Yes, the incentive for small coalition leaders to borrow internationally is enormous. Think about the math.
How does it work?
Let's say a leader borrows $1 billion. That money comes in now and can be distributed immediately as private rewards to their small winning coalition, maybe a few hundred or a few thousand people. Huge benefit for them today.
And the repayment?
The repayment obligation, the future taxes needed to pay back that $1 billion plus interest, is spread across the entire population, the millions of interchangeables, over many years. So each essential gets a massive immediate payoff, while their share of the future cost is tiny. It's an incredibly skewed incentive. The smaller the coalition, the more attractive it is to borrow heavily and let the masses deal with the debt later.
Which makes international efforts like debt forgiveness seem problematic.
Very problematic, according to this theory. Things like the HIPC initiative, heavily indebted poor countries often provide unconditional debt relief. The intention is good, stop the poor paying for dictators' theft. But the effect can be to prop up the dictator.
How so?
Because financial pressure, like an impending debt crisis, is one of the few things that can force a leader to reform, to perhaps liberalize the economy, or even expand the coalition just to raise enough legitimate tax revenue to survive. Wiping out the debt removes that pressure. It gives the autocrat breathing room, lets them carry on without changing the system.
So they just rack up new debts.
Often, yes. Countries like Ethiopia and Belarus reportedly received significant debt relief and then promptly started borrowing again. Why? Because the fundamental incentive structure for the leader, reward the small coalition, borrow if you can, hadn't changed at all. Debt relief without demanding institutional change just resets the clock on the same bad behavior.
That really reframes the whole aid and debt discussion. It all comes back to the incentives created by the coalition size. Let's talk about policy choices more broadly. Rule 5 says don't waste money on the public. How does that play out with things like education or health?
Well, autocrats aren't usually interested in providing high-quality, universal public services like health and education for their own sake. They'll provide just enough to keep the workforce functional. Meaning you need people healthy enough to show up to work and pay taxes and maybe literate enough to follow basic instructions or work in low-level industries. But you don't want them too healthy or too educated.
Why not?
Because highly educated, critically thinking citizens are more likely to question authority, demand rights, organize opposition. So basic primary education might be tolerated or even encouraged to boost productivity slightly, but higher education for the masses. That's often seen as a political risk and deliberately restricted in small coalition systems.
But the elite's children get educated.
Oh, absolutely. Higher education becomes a private reward for the essentials and their families. They often send their kids to the best universities in the West. It's noted, with some irony, that places like Oxford and Swiss boarding schools have educated the offspring of numerous dictators: Kim Jong-un, Mugabe's kids, Gaddafi's kids. Education for the masses is a threat. Education for the elite is a perk.
You can even see the political structure in something as mundane as road construction, apparently, the curvy roads idea.
Yeah, this is a fantastic visual example from the sources. Think about building a major highway. In a large coalition country like the US or Canada, the political cost of not compensating people whose homes or lands are in the way is very high. You need broad support, so you tend to build straighter roads. Even if it means paying more for land acquisition and relocation, compensation is part of the public good calculation.
But in a small coalition country,
The calculation flips. Why pay expensive compensation to hundreds or thousands of non-essential interchangeables living in villages along the most direct route? It's politically cheaper to just build the road around them. Make it curve and win to avoid inconveniencing anyone whose support actually matters. So you end up with these incredibly inefficient, curvy highways in places like Guinea or Equatorial Guinea. The road's path literally reflects who matters politically.
that's amazing. And Mobutu in Zaire, with his power grid.
Mobutu Sese Seko took it a step further. He had a major hydroelectric dam built, but located it over 1,000 miles away from the copper mines it was supposed to power. And the transmission lines deliberately bypassed nearly all the towns and villages in between.
Why on earth do that?
Pure control. Rule 3. By keeping the power source distant and the lines direct only to the mine and his palaces, he could literally switch off the copper industry, the country's main source of revenue, if anyone involved displeased him. It wasn't about efficient infrastructure for the nation. It was infrastructure designed explicitly to maintain his personal control over the money flow and reward his coalition. Same logic applies to huge, prestigious projects like the Aswan Dam or 3 gorges massive potential for corruption, private rewards, even if they cause huge disruption, public cost.
Which leads us directly to corruption. The theory basically says corruption isn't a bug in small coalition systems. It's a feature, right?
It's often the primary mechanism for distributing those private rewards efficiently. In the world's most corrupt countries, you almost always find small coalition regimes: bribes, kickbacks, embezzlement. These are the tools the leader uses to keep the essentials loyal. It's how the system functions.
But don't democracies have corruption too?
Of course. But it tends to look different. In large coalition systems, blatant cash bribes are riskier and less efficient for buying widespread support. So private rewards often get disguised as public policy.
Like what? Give me an example.
Think about narrowly targeted tax loopholes that benefit a specific industry or wealthy group that happens to be a key donor base, or earmarks and spending bills directing funds to a specific district represented by a key ally, or even certain welfare programs designed more to lock in a voting bloc than for maximum efficiency. It's still about rewarding political support. It's just laundered through policy because the coalition is too big and transparency too high for simple cash payoffs.
The analysis of organizations like the IOC and FIFA really highlights this small coalition bribery efficiency.
Oh, perfectly. The International Olympic Committee's structure is almost purpose-built for it. You have, a maximum of 115 members. You only need 58 votes to win the presidency or, crucially, pick a host city.
So bribing is cheaper than building.
Way cheaper. Why spend billions convincing your entire national population and building infrastructure up front when you can spend a fraction of that securing the votes of, say, 58 key IOC members? The small coalition makes direct bribery the most rational economic strategy for potential host cities or candidates.
And FIFA choosing Qatar for the 2022 World Cup. Same logic.
Exactly the same logic. That decision came down to the 24 members of the executive committee, only 13 votes needed. Again, a tiny winning coalition. From a purely cynical, rational perspective based on this theory, buying those 13 votes makes more sense than trying to justify the decision based on climate, logistics, or human rights to a global audience. The corruption isn't surprising. It's structurally predictable given the small coalition size.
So if corruption is structural, just making penalties harsher won't fix it.
Probably not. The sources argue that increasing sentences for corruption might even be counterproductive. It just gives the leader more leverage over their essentials. Because the essentials are usually involved in the corruption too. If the penalty for getting caught is higher, they become even more dependent on the leader's protection to avoid prosecution. The leader can use the threat of enforcing those harsh penalties as a stick to ensure loyalty, alongside the carrot of allowing the corruption in the first place. Think of Yasser Arafat, reportedly brilliant at both allowing and monitoring corruption to keep his Fatah elites in line.
So again, the only real fix is changing the structure.
You have to change the incentives, you have to make the winning coalition larger so that direct bribery becomes too expensive and too difficult to manage. That's the only fundamental way to reduce systemic corruption, according to this view.
Okay, let's widen the lens one last time to international relations. Foreign aid is a big one. We tend to think of it as charity, but the theory suggests a much darker purpose.
Yeah, this is one of the toughest pills to swallow in the analysis. The argument is that foreign aid is given primarily to benefit the donor country's constituents, not necessarily the recipients.
How does that work? Aid is a tool for re-election.
Essentially, yes. Democratic leaders need to keep their large coalitions happy. Aid money can be used to buy policy concessions from recipient governments, things like favorable trade deals, access to resources, military basing rights, or votes in the UN policies that benefit powerful groups within the donor country's own coalition.
So donors deliberately give aid to corrupt, autocratic governments.
The theory says yes, precisely because they are corrupt and autocratic. Small coalition leaders are the cheapest, most reliable partners if you want to buy policy. They have the power to make concessions without worrying about their own population, and they desperately need the cash to pay off their essentials. So aid becomes a transaction. Cash and security for the autocrat in exchange for policies that helps a democratic leader get reelected back home.
The Samuel Doe example in Liberia during the Cold War fits this perfectly.
Absolutely. The U.S. poured millions in aid into Doe's regime, not because he was a good leader, but because he was reliably anti-Soviet. That was a policy the U.S. coalition wanted. The aid money kept Doe's small military coalition loyal, guaranteeing the policy. When the Cold War ended, the policy wasn't needed anymore, the aid tap was turned off, and Doe quickly fell. The aid was never about Liberian development, it was about U.S. political goals.
And the price of buying these policies depends entirely on the recipient's coalition size.
Completely. Buying policy from a large coalition democracy is expensive and difficult. The leader has to convince millions of voters or their representatives that the deal is worthwhile. The compensation has to be huge.
Like Turkey rejecting the U.S. offer for Iraq war access.
Exactly. Turkey is a large coalition democracy. The U.S. offered $6 billion for basing rights to invade Iraq from the north. Huge sum. But politically, it was incredibly risky for the Turkish government, allowing an invasion of a neighbor. When you broke down the $6 billion across Turkey's essential political backers, it apparently wasn't nearly enough compensation to justify the political risk. They said no.
But smaller coalitions are cheaper to buy.
Much cheaper. Autocracies like Kuwait or Saudi Arabia could grant basing rights much more easily. The leaders only needed to satisfy a small number of essentials, so the price per essential was far lower. It makes policy shopping much easier for powerful donor states when dealing with autocrats.
This same logic extends to how nations fight wars. Clausewitz said war is politics by other means.
Which means it's a continuation of domestic politics. How a leader fights reflects who they need to keep happy back home.
So small coalition autocrats fight differently than large coalition democracies.
Very differently. Autocrats, following a sort of Sun Tzu logic, might fight more readily for tangible gains like land or treasure, but they are extremely careful about spending resources, money, or soldiers' lives if it jeopardizes their ability to pay off their core essentials. Losing a war might be survivable if the coalition stays paid. Running out of cash to pay them is fatal.
Whereas democracies,
needing broad support, tend to be more cautious about starting wars. Like the Weinberger Doctrine suggests, fight only with clear objectives and overwhelming force. But once committed, they focus heavily on achieving the policy goals their large coalition demands, and crucially, on protecting the lives of their soldiers. Losing soldiers needlessly is politically toxic when the soldiers are drawn from or related to your large winning coalition.
The Six-Day War example really highlights this economic calculation difference.
It's stark. In 1967, Israel, a democracy, needed its large coalition, around 650,000 people, to sacrifice maybe $60 each in today's money for an all-out war effort. Politically achievable. Nasser's Egypt, a small coalition regime, would have needed his few thousand essentials to forego something like $150,000 each in personal income benefits to fund a truly equivalent effort.
He couldn't risk asking them for that.
No way. Demanding that kind of sacrifice from his core backers would likely trigger a coup. They valued their private rewards far more than the national goal of defeating Israel. So Nasser fought a less committed war, focused on his own survival, which made Israel's victory much easier. The domestic political structure dictated the military strategy and outcome.
And this focus on soldiers' lives explains differences in casualty management.
Definitely. Think about the U.S. reaction after Black Hawk down in Somalia, immense political pressure to retrieve every soldier, dead or alive. That reflects the high value placed on individual lives in a large coalition system. Contrast that with the grim story of the Ethiopian general in the war with Eritrea, who allegedly ordered his own trapped troops bombed because he couldn't retrieve them and their equipment and didn't want the enemy to get the gear.
Bomb them all.
The logic, however brutal, fits the small coalition model. The soldiers were interchangeables, but the expensive equipment might be needed to keep the real essentials happy later. Protecting the means to reward the coalition trumped protecting the lives of non-essential soldiers.
Okay, finally, the big ideal, promoting democracy. Given all this cynical realism, does the theory suggest democracies actually want to spread democracy?
The rhetoric says yes, but the actions often say no. The sources argue that democratic leaders will happily undermine or allow the overthrow of a foreign democracy if that democracy elects leaders pursuing policies the donors' constituents don't like.
Imoran on the Congo.
Patrice Lumumba was Congo's first democratically elected leader, but he sought Soviet help and pursued policies that clashed with U.S. and Belgian economic and strategic interests during the Cold War. So the U.S. supported his removal and eventual assassination. A compliant dictator is often preferred over a troublesome democrat, because the democratic leader in the donor country needs to satisfy their own large coalition. If a foreign democracy implements policies harmful to the donor's constituents, for example, nationalizing industries, aligning with rivals, the donor's leader faces political pressure back home. A compliant autocrat who only needs to satisfy a small group is much easier to deal with and will sell out their own people's interests for the right price. Aid, security guarantees.
So after diving deep into these, frankly, depressing rules of power, what's the takeaway? Is there any hope for better governance? What can actually be done?
Well, the core argument is that change comes from changing the structure, not just the leaders. Leaders themselves rarely choose to expand their winning coalition. Why would they dilute their own power and share the rewards more widely? So change usually has to be forced.
And the single most important change?
Expanding the size of the winning coalition. That's the fundamental lever. As that group gets bigger, the logic of governance has to shift.
Why is expansion the key fix?
Because there's a tipping point. When the coalition is tiny, private rewards are huge. As it grows, the cost of buying everyone off individually becomes astronomical. The rewards per person shrink drastically. At some point, maybe around 25, 30 essentials in simplified models, it becomes more rational even for the members of the coalition to prefer a system that provides reliable public goods, stable economy, rule of law, services, rather than risking everything for diminishing private spoils in a volatile autocracy where they might be purged next.
So how do you encourage that expansion? What about in existing democracies?
In places like the U.S., the focus should be on fighting institutions that artificially shrink the effective coalition or make leaders less accountable to the broad electorate. Things like the Electoral College, which can allow a president to win without the popular vote, and especially gerrymandering.
Gerrymandering lets politicians pick their voters.
Exactly. It creates safe seats where the only real election is the primary, beholden to a small group of party faithful, not the general electorate. The sources grimly note that the re-election rates in heavily gerrymandered U.S. House districts aren't wildly different from those in the old Soviet Supreme Soviet. We need reforms that maximize accountability to the largest possible group.
And for autocracies, how do you push them towards larger coalitions without just invading?
Financial leverage seems key. You need to force autocrats off the easy money natural resources and unconditional aid and make them dependent on taxing their own population.
Make them need their people's productivity.
Yes. Look at Jerry Rawlings in Ghana. He started as a dictator, but the economy completely collapsed. He literally had to liberalize, grant more freedoms, hold competitive elections, essentially expand his coalition just to generate enough reliable tax revenue from a functioning economy to keep any supporters paid off. Economic desperation can compel political reform.
What about technology?
Tech is a fascinating double-edged sword for autocrats. Things like widespread mobile phone access or internet access can boost productivity, which increases the potential tax base, good for Rule 3. But it also makes it vastly easier for citizens to communicate, coordinate protests, and challenge the regime, bad for survival. Leaders face a dilemma. Allow the tech for economic gain, but risk political instability, or restrict it and stifle the economy. Pushing for open tech access can therefore indirectly push towards liberalization. Think about Myanmar charging over $1,000 for a SIM card back in the day. Pure control.
So we started with this idea that it's all cynical self-interest. The final provocation seems to be that the fault isn't just with dictators, but maybe with us, citizens in democracies.
That's the really uncomfortable conclusion. We, as voters in large coalition democracies, demand things from our leaders: low consumer prices, access to cheap resources, national security advantages, profitable trade deals. Our leaders, to survive politically, deliver those things.
Even if it means propping up a dictator somewhere else.
Even if it means propping up a dictator who suppresses their own people but gives us cheap oil or cooperates on counterterrorism. Or even if it means undermining a fragile democracy overseas that dares to elect a leader who might nationalize a mine owned by one of our companies or raise the price of a key commodity. Our demand for self-interest drives our leaders' foreign policy choices just as much as their own survival instinct.
So real global change requires us.
It requires us to potentially accept higher costs or fewer immediate benefits ourselves in order to support policies that genuinely encourage the expansion of coalitions, the interchangeables, the influentials, and especially the essentials everywhere. It means demanding that our leaders prioritize long-term global stability and human well-being over short-term national advantage, even when it pinches our wallets.
That's a huge ask. It shifts the responsibility.
It suggests that if we don't change our demands, our leaders will continue to play the cynical game because the rules of their political survival compel them to. The structure dictates the behavior, both theirs and, indirectly, ours.
A deeply challenging thought to end on. It certainly reframes how you watch the news and think about political decisions, both at home and abroad. Thank you for taking us through this very bracing deep dive.
It's definitely a different lens to view the world through. Thanks for having me.
And thank you for joining us on The Deep Dive.